How's it, chaps, and welcome back to the Burton Builds garage. Today I'm going to show you how to change out the clutch in your car. Now, full disclosure, I've never done this alone before. I normally have a helping hand, but I'm sure it's going to be okay. It's a fairly simple job or process. We need to remove the gearbox and a couple of other bits and pieces, and that way we can get access to the pressure plate, the clutch plate, and the release bearing. Those are the three items that we need to change. Also, a good friend of mine, he's quite a lot more knowledgeable on this type of thing. He said that we may need to skim the flywheel. Now, if you're not too sure what that is, if you're walking down the side of a river, along the river bank, if you will, and you normally find these little round flat stones and you pick it up and you skim it across the water, it's absolutely nothing like that. A couple of things that you're going to need. First and most important thing is going to be a jack. Now, that's him. This is not a very big jack, but it will do the job. Now, word of advice here, believe me, you don't want to be part of the competition between gravity and your jack. You will come off second best, especially if you are underneath the vehicle. So, to stop that from happening, you want to use a set of jack stands, and that's these things. Normally you use two of these. That's the safest option. Definitely use some of those. And also some wheel chocks. If you don't have wheel chocks, a piece of wood to put behind the back wheels of the car. That's to stop it rolling around once it's jacked up. Don't trust your handbrake. Some of the other stuff, you might need a couple of spanners, a pair of pliers. So I'm going to use a big screwdriver, but more like a big pry bar. That would be better to use. Also a socket set. Now, this is just a ratchet and a socket, so you'll need a couple of these things. Some rags. If you don't have rags, then just go and look in your wife's cupboard. I'm sure you'll find something to use there. Also, what you're definitely going to need for the flywheel, if you remove it, is, well, this is an electronic torque wrench, but you can also get the old mechanical ones that you pull and click. So one of those. And what makes the job quite a lot easier, more so to remove bolts, is an impact wrench. So this helps out quite a lot, especially for the really, really tight bolts. I reckon it's going to be a fairly simple job. It's not the quickest of jobs. It's probably going to take you an entire day to complete this. But since we've got all the correct tools at our disposal, it should be fairly easy. Although, if you do find yourself battling, don't be scared of a little bit of percussive maintenance. The bigger the problem, the bigger the hammer. Anyway, let's get working. So I've got it on good authority from a close friend of mine. He said that it's probably going to be easier to complete the job if we remove both side shafts completely. It's a little bit more work, but it'll make the job a bit easier. So what we need to do is remove the hub nut, that center nut there, and that means the side shaft can actually come out of the stub axle, which I think is what it's called, not too sure. And then the drive shaft, which is that piece over there, doesn't really want to focus. That's going to pull out of the gearbox side. That's got a little snap ring in it. So we can just give that a small bump, and it should snap out of the, well, not snap out, but release itself from the gearbox, and then we'll completely remove that. Once those two are out, then there's no chance of actually damaging. As you can see, there's a bit of a rubber boot down there, and there's also a rubber boot over there. So there's no or very little chance of damaging those in the process. So easy when you've got one of these impact drivers. Okay, so there we have it. The stub axle is, for the most part, loose. It's actually loose from the McPherson strut. I'm not going to pull it too hard. There we go. You can actually see the axle is completely loose. So we'll just try and, I don't know if we can actually get this all the way out. Oh, there we go. It's almost coming out. There we go. Actually, it was a lot easier than what I thought it would be. So we've just got to snap it out the the side of the gearbox, we're going to use a pry bar just to get that little snap ring loose, and then the entire shaft should come right out. Cool, that looks like it. So just got the subframe to take loose, and the gearbox is very, very accessible. Something to keep in mind before you pull the side shafts out of the gearbox is to drain the gearbox oil. Now you can see that I've cleaned this area quite nicely. I'm going to reuse the oil. So we're going to take the nut loose, and the oil is going to drip straight onto the floor. Now it's going to be a little bit difficult to clean up off the floor because I want to reuse it. Now we could suck it up with a straw, but the problem with that is nowadays with paper straws, after probably 2 or 3 minutes of sucking, it's going to go soft, as paper does when it goes into liquid. So what we're going to do is just put it into this 5-liter clean container. It had plastic fittings in it. It's now going to have gearbox oil in it. I don't think it's going to be more than 5 liters, probably more like 2 to 2.5 liters. So that was fairly simple. Just stuck in the pry bar and gave it a small bump, and it came right out. Pretty easy, a lot easier than I expected. So this is the small snap ring I was talking about that was inside the gearbox. It seats itself inside the differential, and all that you need to do is just give it a little bit of a bump on one of these edges, and what ends up happening is this little ring, it compresses, and then it lets go of the seating groove inside the gearbox. So I think it's at least a seating groove, and then it kind of lets itself free. So when you install it, exactly the opposite is going to happen. You're going to stick this end back into the gearbox. It's going to push up to that little ring, or the groove is going to push up to that little ring, and then you give it a small bump in that direction, and this ring will seat itself back into its groove. So quite a simple and effective design, but it could be tricky if you didn't know what was happening or what you were looking for when you're trying to remove the side shafts. So there we have it. The gearbox is finally out. It was a little bit more difficult than what I thought it would be. A difficulty in being the fact that you can see I made a bracket to actually hold or support the gearbox. I was a little bit skeptical about how heavy the gearbox was, and it wasn't really wanting to come off the dowels or the locating pins, the indexing pins that index the gearbox to the motor. It wasn't coming off of those really easily, so I had to wiggle it a bit, and I actually didn't really want it falling off, and then all of a sudden it falls. Maybe I'm under it and I get a little bit jammed, finger gets caught or something silly like that. So ended up spending about an hour just making this little bracket. Fairly simple flat bar bracket. It actually bolts to the jack and supported the gearbox nicely. So once I had that all bolted up, the gearbox came straight out with literally zero effort. So pretty glad I spent the hour doing that. So far the clutch is also off, and definitely the clutch plate is worn. If we have a look at the flywheel side, you can see that there is a bit of discoloration where the clutch plate actually runs or binds with the flywheel, and that discoloration is an indication that there has been a bit of slippage and there's a bit of heat buildup. So what we're going to do is remove the flywheel, and I'm going to have the flywheel skimmed. It looks like the rear main seal is also leaking, so we are going to need to replace that. Something else that you want to keep in mind, not just when you are changing a rear main seal, but generally any seal, is the running surface. So if the seal has been running for, well, in this case, not a couple of 100,000, but a good couple of 1,000 kilometers, the seal can actually become hard and eventually wear the metal. And you can actually see a line in the center of that running surface. Now, on the left-hand side, it's been cleaned up, and on the right-hand side, there's like a bit of a brownish stain, and that hasn't been cleaned up yet. So that brownish stain is actually, there's residue, and I would suppose, I'm not sure what it would be called, but maybe like there's a burnt carbon oil residue there, and the seal itself was running in that small little groove. So it was still sealing in the groove, but if you had to just hit another seal in, or not hit it, but press another seal in, a new seal, and the seal's running surface starts running on any of the brown colored area, then it's probably not going to seal. And if it does seal, it's not going to last very long. So very, very important to actually clean the running surface. So I'm just using a bit of 1000 grit sandpaper. You can use 1000, 1200, 1500, as long as it's not too abrasive, and clean up the surface so that it's very smooth and clean and uniform. And then in this case, with the new seal is exactly the same as the old seal. So what we're going to do is, when we press the seal in, we're going to press it in 1 millimeter deeper than what the old seal was, so that this new seal's running surface, or the actual point where it seals onto the metal shaft or the crankshaft, is not running in that old groove. That way it's running on a fresh piece of metal, and it should last another couple of 100,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
All good so far. I have popped in another rear main seal and given everything a good clean. So it's always good practice just to make sure everything is nice and clean before you put it back together. So inside of the bell housing, also the motor's backing plate, and I've got the flywheel back. That's been sort of skimmed, if you say that. It's definitely nice and flat now. And there is the replacement clutch. Something that is also quite important to do before you put this whole lot together is to check that the clutch plate that you got actually splines or indexes onto the gearbox's splines correctly. The last thing you want to be doing is bolting this all together and then battling to get it in and realizing, oh wait, the splines in the clutch don't actually match the gearbox. So fairly easy to do that. We just kind of line it up, stick it in, and we can also feel that the clutch plate is moving freely or sliding freely. So that's a good thing. Also the release bearing, that's this thing here. We can pop that on and we can see there's also free movement, so no problems there. Another thing not to forget is to actually install the release bearing and the fork for the release bearing and all of the stuff that goes with it. It's quite easy to forget that, and you get a bit excited, put everything together, bolt the gearbox in, and then you realize you've got a couple of spare pieces, and that's going to mean the entire gearbox will have to come out again. So keep that in mind. So that's it, chaps. Everything is now complete. It definitely took me longer than 1 day. The reason for that is mainly my own fault. You guys know that little rabbit hole known as YouTube. You go and check out something for 3 minutes and 4 hours later it's dark outside, you're dehydrated, and nothing has been done. Yeah, but everything is complete now. I only broke a couple of fingernails, one toe, and a bruised ego, but after the test drive, everything is working perfectly. So pretty happy with the result. A couple of things that I didn't show in the video. After putting in the gearbox, we obviously bolted it in and bolted up all the ancillary items. I ended up putting in new gearbox oil, since the gearbox oil that was in the car previously had been in there since it was brand new, and the gearbox oil is not that expensive, so just put some new stuff in. And yeah, as I said, took it for a test drive and everything worked pretty damn well. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.